Welcome, everyone, to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host, and this is our segment, Meta Music. And welcome to our prequels continued segment, although we're going to take a little bit of a detour to the sequels momentarily because we have a special guest this week. This is our Meta Music segment where we talk about everything to do with the Star Wars universe and music, especially the music of John Williams, although we have dipped our toes into The Mandalorian as well as John Powell's soundtrack of Solo, which has been a lot of fun. With me for this segment and for the prequels is Christy Carew.
Hi, MC. Thanks for having me.
Frank Lehman.
Hi, how are you doing?
Our special guest, Elyse Willis.
Yay.
Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Elyse, you have a special role within, I guess, the choral universe. You get to contribute your voice to scores as, you know, a vocalist on many people's, I guess, soundtracks, experiences. Can you tell me a little bit more about your background before we get into your connection to Star Wars?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am what you would call a session singer, which means that we show up at scoring stages for projects like film and TV, video games, commercials, anything where they need to hire singers. A lot of the time we get there and we don't even know what the project is before we get there, which can be a little intimidating, but adds to the excitement. So many times we just show up, we don't know what it is until we see music on the stand, and we just read the music down and we leave and we hope that what we did was good and that the composer got what he or she needed. And it's a very fun job because it requires a lot of versatility and flexibility. You never quite know what you're walking into. And of course, the final product often is something that people, really cherish, a kind of a soundtrack to their lives. When I think back on like early Disney films when I was a little kid, Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, I was really young when those came out and they were so influential. And I remember like all of the score music moments and all of the moments. And to think that I'm a part of that now is kind of insane.
Really
it's a little mind blowing. Yeah.
I was just thinking about the stress as a composer, especially when you've prepared your own sheet music. When you get to the session and you don't have someone like Joanne Kane making sure everything is perfect. And the singers and the musicians are looking at your music for the first time and you're like, oh my God, did I make this easy? And be like, what is this? Am I going to waste time trying to explain myself? Like that's always the moment where I'm the most terrified.
Yeah.
And then when everything's cool and it's super clear and I've made it as easy as possible for them, I'm just like,
the best for somebody else.
Exactly.
So there's no way to, avoid all of that. But this just the fact that you think about it at all means that it's probably going to be good. So I'm sure there's some people who don't put much thought into it.
Yeah.
Oh, I am the biggest stickler for enchromatic spellings.
Yeah.
And to be theoretically accurate. So
exactly.
Preaching to the choir, literally.
You've had an influence on me with that. I do think about you when I'm doing that. And I'm like, how can I be perfect with this so that I am adhering to
it can be tricky though, because sometimes the sort of proper and harmonic spelling means that intervallically you get some weird jumps, and so Chris and I talk about that a lot. He'll be like, how do you want this spelled? How would this make sense to you? And it can be tricky because the most important thing I suppose is that singing whatever line you're singing, it makes sense intervallically. But I think a lot of people sort of write singers off that we will actually want the entire chord up and down spelled correctly because we want to know what the chord is and like our position in the chord. I mean, obviously not every singer works like that, but the people I think that are doing like the choral music, that are going in and sight reading stuff, we really like that. We want to know where we're at. And sometimes we get a little forgotten for our musical abilities in that regard.
And it's all completely sight reading. Is there any kind of preparation?
Yeah, every now and then if there's a really bizarre cue, maybe quite quick, or if there's some difficult language or something, they might send something out in advance. But it depends on the project and how comfortable they are with some of the material getting out into the world. For instance, they sent out on Despicable Me 3. There was, I don't know if you saw Despicable Me 3.
You finish talking and then I'll get.
Well, there's a moment in it where the Minions end up like on a talent show, and I forget exactly the context of how they end up there, but they have to perform on stage in front of people, and they end up doing this Minion language version of "I am the very model of a modern major general."
Oh my god!
You were the one that did that?
I mean, the
chorus.
The main thing that you hear is like the guy who voices the Minions, but like we were all doing that in the recording session, so they sent that music out a little bit in advance because
of course.
That would have been very. I mean, it was still really hard. We actually did that live with the Master Choral because we had a whole concert of like film music. And I was one of the soloists on it. So I actually know it quite well now. It's like, Pita pita mi la mi lata katiki politica. Like, but it took me like a week to really get it in my mouth. And at the recording session, they were like going around filming, for like behind the scenes footage. And every time the camera was on me, I'd screw up. And so I'm sure there's footage of me just going like,
That is so amazing.
That's funny.
Yeah. So sometimes stuff like that, they'll send it
I'm
out.
actually on the board of a community theater that specializes in GNS. And, like modern major general is of course like, a staple. That's hilarious.
Yes.
Yeah, you were about to tell us just about your musical background and
Well, as I said, I grew up watching a lot of Disney movies, and so that was a big part of my musical heritage as well as like old musicals. My grandpa was a huge classic musical fan, so I spent a lot of time watching that. And then I started playing piano, I think, when I was 6, violin when I was 9. I switched to viola when I was 13. And then I started singing in community theater, I think around 7 or 8. And, so it was just kind of a combination of all of those elements until I got to college. And then I decided to focus more on singing. But I still played in the orchestra at UCLA. There was sort of a music major orchestra and then like a non-music combo orchestra that I was a little bit more suited for because I wasn't quite good enough on viola to be in the music major orchestra. But that was good because it kept me playing and kept me reading, keeping all my musical skills up. And I did my teaching credential when I was there. So I was a music education major, which I think was good. A lot of those skills actually transfer well into session singing, and especially when I'm contracting and sort of helping lead the session. If there are people that are, for whatever reason, struggling with something, I feel like I can kind of draw on those skills to help them get through it sometimes. And then at the end of college, I auditioned for the LA Master Choral, and I was super, super lucky, like really life-changingly lucky, and got in because honestly, I'm not quite sure what the direction of my life would be without that. Because that not only kept me doing music after college, but introduced me to a lot of people who were doing session singing, as well as, obviously lots of other avenues of performance. But that's how I got my foot in the door with that is, I had a few different people recommending me to people to be hired for sessions because they felt that I had the skill set, and I was, I think, generally a nice person to work with, which is always important. So the Master Choral was a huge door that opened for me. And then my husband is a composer, Christopher Willis. And so I'm very fortunate that he works on some projects that require singers because not everybody does. And so very, very lucky with that. So I'm able to not only sing on those projects, but also contract the singers for his projects, which has been some really nice experience for me.
It's amazing. And we'll just note that Christopher recently won the most, what I think is the most prestigious film music award, the International Film Music Critics Awards. I think that they look at a wider range of scores than perhaps the Oscar does when they make their long list and their short list. And I think they think a little bit more hard about it. And Chris's score for the David Copperfield movie, like you heard people talking about it for so long this year and how incredible it was. And there'd been all of this buzz about him for years leading up to this. And so it's really amazing to see him getting that recognition. I mean, my kids watch shows that he scores. I already knew he was so amazing. Aww. And just when I got to meet you guys a couple years ago, just this incredible musical power couple. So you guys are really inspiring to me. And I think it's so great that you get to work together on that level as well, because he is working on the type of project where he can bring in a big group of singers and have you contract. That's really inspiring and special.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel really lucky about that for sure.
From the music academia side of things, I know a lot of us are over the moon with the Death of Stalin score.
Oh, thanks.
Like knowing it's wonderful work. I have maybe it's an obvious question to us, but maybe some of the listeners aren't familiar with what the job of a session musician actually is. So would you mind just describing what the job entails?
Yeah, I sort of grazed over it a little bit already, but basically you know, if somebody needs singers or instrumentalists, we like to say singers and instrumentalists because singers are also musicians.
Yep.
So a language thing that we try to spread out our gospel of that into the universe. If there's a project where you need musicians of any kind, they are hired generally by a contractor of some kind, so an orchestral contractor or a vocal contractor. The contractor will be responsible for hiring the people that they feel are appropriate for that project. So, knowing your singers or your players, but I feel like especially in the case of singers, because our voices are such, an individual part of us and we all really do have different skills. Mm-hmm. So hiring the appropriate people for the project. And we show up at the scoring stage, as I said many times, not knowing whether what the project is, sometimes not knowing what it is at all, or not knowing what the style is or the genre of the music, not knowing exactly what we're going to be doing that day. And making the music on the page come to life for the film score or for the character that we're voicing, depending. I mean, I'd say the majority of what I do is more film score stuff, but recently I have been doing some more character. And that's always really exciting to find that new character voice. And then we record it. We head home. We don't hear it for a very long time. And then we wait for the project to come out and we hope that it all turned out okay. It's a pretty exciting job. It's not like a 9-to-5 thing by any means. I mean, I think, years and years ago, that might have been the case for orchestras, and for a select few people might still more the case. Obviously not now so much in COVID times, but it's definitely, there are busier times and there are slower times, and there's obviously a lot of talent in Los Angeles. And so, you don't do everything that you want to do. It's not like the same, 40 people on every single film score, but that's right. Okay. There are so many talented people. I personally don't mind sharing the work, as long as I'm not completely forgotten, which I've been fortunate enough not to be. But it's a great job because we really get to influence what people listen to and be a part of their sort of musical heritage, I think.
And sorry, just to explain to our listeners, like, what is your vocal range and what do you specialize in?
Well, technically I'm a soprano. I'm not like a super duper high soprano though. So I really enjoy, I would describe myself as a sopralto, just because I love that. I do hop around in sessions, and sometimes I'll be a soprano in a session and sometimes I'll be an alto. And that's another thing that can happen in sessions is maybe you need to rebalance or there are splits. And so, I tend to live like somewhere in the middle high area, if that makes sense. I was trained classically. So a lot of the stuff, like the sort of classic choral stuff I do, but I've always had interest in other genres. And so I do appear in those from time to time. there's a project recently that was like a musical theater project where I was able to sing all of the demos for it for a TV show.
Nice.
And so that was really fun being able to explore that side of my voice again. And actually, just coincidentally, completely having nothing to do with me, Chris got hired to write the underscore. So clearly our musical interests overlap since people thought of us for both of those things.
They're aligning.
Yeah. It's funny, actually, we were talking about this recently because I mentioned I grew up watching all these old school musicals and he really didn't. That, you know, it's not that he doesn't like them, but it just wasn't really part of his childhood. And he grew up with Star Wars being a major part of his childhood. And so recently, like we've had to watch all these old school musicals for him. And then I've been watching all the Star Wars. So we've totally crossed over. It's quite funny.
Love it.
That's awesome. What is your favorite musical? I love musicals. So what is your favorite
Oh my
musical?
gosh. That's a tough one. Well, I'll just say
I don't
like
them.
Oh no, I'll have to
Okay,
convince you.
Hamilton.
I'll have to convince you. Well, I would say like emotionally, Les Mis was really big for me because I saw it when I was 8 and it really made a huge impact on me. I don't know if I would say that's my favorite musical, musically speaking, but that, you know, that holds a special place in my heart. I'm a big fan of Ragtime. That was another one that made a big impact on me. Guys and Dolls, if we're talking about old musicals, and Oklahoma, the version of Oklahoma with Hugh Jackman.
That was so good. Yeah.
Man, it's so good. Yeah.
I saw Hugh on Broadway in A Boy from Oz. He is talented live.
Well, and I'm still in a bit of a state of mourning that I haven't been able to see him in The Music Man with Sutton Foster, which was supposed to happen but for COVID. And so I think it's still going to happen. But yeah, I have a friend and we used to try to go to New York like once a year if we could to just binge on musicals. And so we have a standing date whenever The Music Man comes
whenever it opens up
into our lives. That's right.
That's amazing.
And of course I have to say West Side Story. That,
of course,
you know, that's of course, right? So I could go on about musicals for a very long time, but there are other things that we're going to
have you. I have another podcast that talks about fiction in general, and I've always wanted to cover musicals, so he might be a good person to
anytime
to jump into this.
The Spielberg West Side Story comes out. That will be really current.
Yep.
I'm very excited about
that.
Very excited.
Yes. All right. So you have a Star Wars connection. It's actually large. You're in a Star Wars.
I am. Well, no one, I think, really knows how to say her name. So I just say Ubbla Mollbro. But I've never actually heard anyone say it. So let's just say that that's how it's pronounced.
And to describe this character, she is, the Canto Bight sort of chase scene is happening. So we have Finn and we have Rose. They are like riding away and like running away, and there's chaos in the casino. There's this moment where I think they're riding towards the character, and she ends up like singing.
Yes,
in shock,
screaming one high B before she is probably run over. You don't really see what happens to her.
That pitch, I think, is coordinated with the cue to match whatever is happening tonally.
That's right. Yeah, I can talk more about that if you would like.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
What was the process behind you being selected to sing that note? And
I was just telling someone else this story and prefacing it with, it's a very typical Hollywood story because it is not glamorous in any way. Basically what happened was they had gotten in touch with the ADR person, like the person who is in charge of like loop group. And, usually I think she works with speakers, obviously that's her main job. And they had asked her to find somebody for this one note. And so she reached out to a colleague of mine who is a singer in the Master Choral and also does voiceover work. And they needed someone to do it like that day. They needed it like immediately. And so she reached out to, I think there were 3 of us that submitted for it. They wanted options. And so it had to be somebody who was available and had their own, recording space and equipment and all of that. And so she knew obviously that we had a studio. And yeah, she called me, and it was one of those things where if it had been a day later, it wouldn't have happened, because Chris and I were going on our first vacation in maybe about 5 or 6 years.
Oh, wow.
And we were leaving the next day. And so she called me and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm buying a swimsuit." She said, "Well, can you record something now?" And I was like, "Okay, I guess so. Yeah. What is it?" And she said, "Well, I don't know what it is. I'm just helping out somebody, but I'll put you in touch." So she had the Loop Group person call me. And she wouldn't tell me what the project was. She just said, "They need you to sing these 3 notes, an E, a G sharp, and a B." And because it was an E major harmony at that moment. And they want you to sing it like each note 4 different ways, or like sort of with varying amounts of vibrato. And essentially getting more and more ridiculous each time to give them options. And like 4 seconds every time. So
wow.
so what I sent them was, I guess, 12 different takes of these 3 notes.
4 seconds. I mean, that's long to belt that a note
I know.
high.
And of course, it wasn't actually 4 seconds. They just wanted material to work with. It was much shorter in the film, but I didn't know. I didn't know what was going on. The only information that I was given was that it's a character who gets taken out.
Oh no, so we know now.
I mean, I don't know whether that means that she dies definitively, but she definitely is in a pickle with that chase, right? So I didn't know what the film was. I didn't know what the character looked like. I didn't have any context of what the scene was other than that. So I just, I called Chris and I was like, "Hey, will you just record me singing, like screaming some high notes?"
And did they end up using the most
like,
ridiculous of your 4 takes?
I think they did. Yeah.
You guys want to listen to it right now?
Oh yeah, let's hear it.
All right, I actually have it open, so.
Oh, I love it. My favorite movie is
It's
so
hilarious.
good. It's so good. I haven't watched it in a few weeks.
Oh no.
I remember a few weeks. I remember I met Christy at I think it was an Emmy function. And we were talking, and it came into the conversation that she was a huge Star Wars fan. And I was like, "Should I tell her? Like, I don't want it to sound like I'm bragging."
You're talking to someone who's got her own Wikipedia page.
Well, in the end, I decided, yes, I should tell her. And I just remember her reaction still. I was like, in Last Jedi, when there's like, and she goes, "Ah, the person who does that," and like ran around the room.
I did. I lost it. I was like, I am in the presence of royalty.
It was very flattering. I remember that with much fondness. Thank you. So
awesome.
So I have to say, just to finish that story, because it's so weird. So, I recorded the stuff, sent it off, and then we went to Mexico on vacation. And I think it was about 3 or 4 days later that I got a text that they had chosen me, but they still wouldn't tell me what it was. And they said, "Okay, well, when you get back, we'll send you paperwork. So, let us know when you're back." So they sent over paperwork, and on the paperwork, it still didn't say what the movie was. It used the code name for the movie.
Space Bear.
That's right.
Space Bear. Yeah.
And so all it said on the paperwork was Space Bear. But the thing was, I had already sung in the choir for Last Jedi. So I knew what the code name was. So otherwise, I don't know if they ever would have told me what the film was. I guess they probably would have. But I still didn't know what she looked like until the movie came out. And I had a friend who was able to go to the cast and crew screening. And I asked him, I was like, "So what does my character look like?" And he was like, kind of like a slug lady, I guess. And then we had a friend in the UK who found one of those like Star Wars companion guides where it has like all the characters, and he took a picture of it. That was the first time I saw it. I was like, "Oh gosh, she's really attractive. Yeah. Good looking, memorable. That's
yeah, memorable. I don't think that you can forget her. And also like that moment is so like punctuating the wonderful, like playful score that John has produced for all of the Canto Bight stuff, like the chase and the sort of, what was it that it was mirroring, Christy, the
Brazil.
Yeah. The Brazil inspired, like
it's in a way, it's lucky that you made the cut, since the music for the Father Years scene, that large set piece, you can see in the DVD, it was actually originally about twice as long, and Williams had written music for almost all of it. So, but your belting was crucial to the structure of the scene. So that
it happens a lot where I get really excited about something that I've done and then it doesn't make the cut, and I'm like, oh no, I shouldn't have told anybody. Like I was in Gangster Squad, that movie with Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone and Sean Penn. I mean, it sort of came and went a little bit. I don't think it did quite as well as they were expecting, but I was actually on screen in that. They had like some Christmas carolers on screen, which is one of the few on camera things that I've done. But the scene that we were in was like super, super pivotal for the film. And so I was like, oh, this is fine. I could totally tell people about this. And then what happened was it was like a shooting inside Grauman's Chinese theater in the film, and that like spilled out onto the sidewalk. And right before the film was released, or when they were like finalizing the edit, the shooting in Aurora happened in the theater.
Oh, yeah.
And so because of that, they changed that entire scene. They like reshot the whole thing and moved it to another location. And I mean, it was like a 3-day shoot with just huge amounts of money and all these, like, because it was set in the 50s, all these period cars, and just, I mean, it was so much money and effort to change that scene. Obviously I understand why they did that, but the moral of that story is never tell anyone that you're in anything until it comes out.
I don't tell anyone I'm working on anything until it comes out. I'm like, I signed for something and I'm like, no, I'm not going to talk about this. Anything could happen.
So as far as your other choral work that you did for The Last Jedi, what are some of the other things that you worked on?
Well, so for The Last Jedi, and for Rise of Skywalker, we had sessions with the orchestra, which is very, very exciting and very rare. So that was quite memorable, especially on Last Jedi, because that was the first time that most of us had ever done that. And I'm trying to remember. I think we were on 3 different cues. There was a cue, I think, with just the women with Carrie Fisher towards the beginning of the film. And then I forget something in the middle. And then the big cue at the end when I think we can be spoiler.
Yes.
When Luke is there, but he's not really there, you know? And he like disappears again, and no. So that cue, that cue was like the most memorable for me, because where they had us positioned in the room was like behind, the strings and the winds on like platforms, but the brass was like on both sides of us. And I want to say that there were maybe something like 8 brass players on each side, and like 4 horns on one side and 4 horns on the other side, something like that. So we were in like this like surround sound. And at the end of that cue, it's like that da 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 da, with the brass.
Yeah.
So intense.
I still remember that moment. Like we were trying to be really quiet because we're still recording, we weren't singing, but they were still recording. But all of us were like kind of looking to either side of us and going like, oh my God, this is so cool. So yeah, that was really a memorable
I'm mind blown
moment.
right now. I'm putting myself in your shoes to experience something like that. And
it was kind of amazing. Yeah. It was all too brief, though, I have to say, because we were only on, those few moments. So we were there not even an hour and a half, maybe, and it's a bummer because then you have to go because the orchestra has more work to do. So we soaked in what we could. Rise of Skywalker was more work than that. Sorry, Frank.
Was the scene projected while you were singing, or is it all blind?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of the projects that we work on, they do have the scene on a screen in the background. with really high profile stuff like this, where they're super anxious about things getting leaked, they usually don't put the picture up. So yeah, we didn't see any picture. I mean, we still had to sign NDAs, obviously, but yeah, we were all like, what are we going to tell people, that we sang an E on this page, you know? But even with the screen not being active in the back, they still like paper over the windows,
right?
You know, so really like no one can see anything that's going on. Yeah, but generally speaking, on films, if they're not quite as secretive as this, we will see something. I mean, it's behind us though, so we really only can see it if the composer tells us to watch a scene, because they want to, you know, they want us to understand the emotion of the scene, or like if it's the guys recording a bit, then we'll turn around and watch it. But otherwise, yeah, we're not super involved with what's happening.
Are you being conducted by a separate choral conductor? Or
that was my question. I was literally just about to ask that. You read my mind.
Yeah, again, it varies on different projects. A lot of times it'll be the orchestrator. A lot of times it'll be the person that they brought in to conduct the orchestra and the choir. Yeah, so for Star Wars, it was John Williams up on the podium.
Yay.
So, pretty cool.
Oh my God.
That's so cool. And then for The Rise of Skywalker, you said that there's more choral in there. I don't know how much we actually get in the final product, because we got like Anthem of Evil and a few others.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's an interesting question. I was again talking about this with Chris last night. It's hard for me to really gauge how much is in the final product without going through the film with a fine tooth comb. Because I know, so for Rise of Skywalker, I should say I contracted that, which meant that you know, for this particular thing, John Williams wanted the LA Master Choral. And so everyone for Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker were all chorale members, as well as being SAG-AFTRA members. But you know, one of the reasons he wanted director Grant Gershon was going to be there, and he, you know, John Williams really trusts his musical opinion in his ear. Yeah. And so generally speaking, vocal contractor would have a little bit more of a role musically in what was happening than I ended up having on this, because we had Grant in the room with us. So for this project, it's a little unfortunate, but I basically was just the person in charge of all the paperwork. I mean, you know, if there are singers that had any issues or whatever, they could come to me and I would bring them to production or whoever. But yeah, for Rise of Skywalker, we had 100 singers in the choir.
Wow.
And that was a lot of work. For me.
Yeah, I'm sure.
A lot. I mean, the largest choir I'd ever sung in previously on a session was 80 people. And that was by far the largest. I mean, score choirs, depending on the project, tend to be more, I would say, generally speaking, in like the maybe 32 to 40 person range. You know, it's expensive, and not every production has the budget for a big choir, but they wanted to go all out on Rise of Skywalker, and you know, this is what John wanted, and what John wants, John gets. So
of course.
So it was, I mean, it was very exciting to be able to employ that many people, but wow, did I work really hard on that stuff. And so in the beginning, it was just supposed to be one session, and that was actually not with the orchestra. It was just a session with him, which I was actually really excited about, because I felt, you know, even though the session with the orchestra for Last Jedi was an amazing experience, we didn't really get, you know, a lot of sort of connection between John, because he was dealing with, you know, so many different things. So I was really excited actually about spending what ended up being a full day at Sony with him and just us. So that was pretty exciting. I think we were there maybe about 6 hours with him. And then after that was over, probably because they were still working on exactly what the music was going to be in the final product for the film, they ended up bringing back a group of 24 women for a day with the orchestra. And then we were actually there for the very final recording session, like his very last Star Wars session
Where
ever.
they pop the champagne and everything.
Yeah. But again, unfortunately, we weren't there for that because our job had finished.
You're finished already. Yeah.
We were not invited to stick around for champagne. But we were still, but it was amazing. I mean, they had, I think on Last Jedi, there were 64 singers, which was still quite a full room.
That's large, yeah.
But on the last day of that session, we had 100 singers in the room with the orchestra. I mean, it was a full house. I think we did. I'm trying to remember the cues that we did. You know, when Rey is in front of Palpatine and the sort of the ceiling or whatever opens and he says, like, you know, they're your friends, like that choral cue was with the orchestra.
Yeah, approaching the throne.
That's
Epic.
yeah. Although it didn't make it into the soundtrack. So what I was going to say before is that because I was the contractor, I was also in charge of the conversion paperwork from what we recorded for the film into what was on the album.
The release, yeah.
Yeah, and so I know exactly how much choir and where it is on the album, but obviously the tracks that are edited for the album don't correlate directly with what's in the film. So yeah, it's difficult for me to really be sure. And, you know, we recorded a lot more material on those days than actually made it into the final product. Because again, I'm sure they were, you know, trying to figure out exactly where things were going to go and what they needed. So better to get more than less, you know, money wise. Yeah.
As Star Wars and particularly Star Wars music aficionados, we're all
heartbroken.
This is kind of like a holy grail now. The complete recording sessions of the last symphony of John Williams.
Of course, yeah.
And trying to piece together what actually was written and what his intentions were. I mean, it's hard. One doesn't want to be too precious about film scores because it's all, you know, contingent and things can be cut, and that's just part of it. But God, is there a lot of interest, and hopefully someday we'll actually get to hear everything that you sang on.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully.
It's historical, really.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Approaching the Throne. In the cue on the soundtrack album, we just appear at the very end of it. There's just this really loud burst of B minor stuff. And we sang a lot more of that in the session. And yeah, it was just, and it was so much fun too, because a lot of the choir stuff that composers want and is sort of the aesthetic that is, you know, is in film music now is like really quiet stuff, you know, kind of atmospheric stuff that me personally, my voice doesn't like naturally do. I have like a little bit of a fuller voice. And so doing that stuff where we were just allowed and encouraged to just be like,
let loose,
balls out, like that was so much fun. And I think that the people in the booth were really impressed because they hadn't really heard like LA singers do that much, which again, I think is more a function of the music that's being written for us that we're recording.
Well, I have a question for you.
They were really happy.
I have a question for you on the day that you guys were alone with him. Like when you watch the BTS of him with the orchestra, and these are some of these people he's worked with for decades, and every individual's name, and then there's these looks that he gives, and he doesn't have to say anything. He'll point and he'll do this, and he has all these very subtle things that he does. So I'm curious if within the LA Master Chorale, because he was so specific about wanting to use this choir and this director. Are there singers within the LA Master Chorale that he has worked with for decades like that he has like a name recognition basis with and that he talks to that way?
I don't know for sure without asking him directly, but I know that there are a number of singers who have done a number of scores with him over the years. So I wouldn't be surprised. There were certainly singers that he recognized. I don't know if he was necessarily on a first name basis with them, but definitely there are singers who have done. I know they did, you know, some singers in that group did Home Alone. Some singers have done like Jurassic Park, AI. So yeah, but those were all, you know, not under sort of the banner of the Master Chorale. That was more just like the normal session singing.
Right.
trajectory where you're piecing together individuals. But yeah, there were certainly people who have a history with him. And I think, having Grant in the room, he was able to really rely on his relationship with us too. So he knows us all really, really well. In the master chorale, we have to re-audition at least once every 2 years. So he knows all of our individual voices and what, certain things certain people do well and where to please us and stuff. So that is really valuable to have in a session.
I've gotten to see him work. One of the first composers that I worked for when I moved here was Sharon Farber, and she's done several premieres.
Sharon.
Yeah, I love Sharon so much. And so this was a year after I moved to LA, but I got to tag along to rehearsals and I got to prep music for her and I got to see him work and see you guys work. And it's, just amazing. It's such a dream of mine to ever have music of mine sung by you guys. So that would be incredible.
Oh, it'll happen
someday.
I have no doubt.
It's on the mood board or with the.
It is. It's on my literal mood board. It's there.
Can I tell you a story from one of the sessions that I think you'll find interesting?
Of course.
Not a lot of people know that this happened. And in fact, John Williams might not know that this happened. But the day that we were there with just the 24 sopranos and altos, because we were a smaller group, we were positioned in the corner of the room and we had some sort of baffling in front of us, like the sort of room dividers, right, to separate our sound a little bit from the orchestra. And those particular dividers were clear on the top so we could see John, but they were not clear on the bottom. So once you got to about maybe 3 to 4 feet, it was just, solid material. And so you couldn't see everything that was happening behind there. That's the crux of the story. And we were in the middle of recording one of the cues, and the person standing next to me put her hand on my shoulder, and I thought that she was maybe trying to get my attention because like someone was doing something that they weren't supposed to, like they'd taken their headphones off or something. And so I turned around and she was in the process of fainting. She had like, I don't know, really low blood sugar or something. And she was amazing, though. I have to give her credit because the orchestra was still recording and she went down so slowly. And so slowly everyone around us like realized what was happening and like caught her as she went down. But John and the orchestra and everybody else, like, they were moving forward. They didn't know what was going on. And we didn't want to stop because we didn't want to be like a reason that we held up recording. And even like Grant didn't know what was going on because he was looking at John, like really focused on him for any instructions. And so I was like, Grant, we have an issue. And so like people were trying to get her some water, and somebody had like one of those packs that you like pour into water that has like electrolytes in it with them. But we're trying to like shuffle around and make sure she's okay, and having to literally stop wherever we are and record, like trying to like, hold up a piece of music or see somebody else's music. And then as soon as the red light was off, like go back to like making sure that she was okay. And I don't think he had any idea that any of that was going on.
That is so amazing that you tell this story, because later when we get talking about like choral music in general, I was going to tell you guys the story of how when I was in college, part of my scholarship, I had to sing in the non-singers choir for 4 years, the university chorus. And I loved it. I'm a terrible singer, but I loved it because I love choral music and I love to write it. And I fainted while we sang the Brahms Requiem.
That's fainted not surprising. That piece
out of
is tough.
Spiritual experience. I fainted out of beauty. I fainted out of the lights are on me. I'm having this transcendent religious spiritual experience. But it was a quick faint. I fell back. It kind of pushed me up, the guy behind me. I recovered and I made it through. But like,
remember which movement
for
it
you?
was?
I don't remember what movement it was. I probably, if I look back at the score now, I could find it. But it was out of pure like, oh my God, I can't believe that I have the privilege of experiencing this, and I'm singing this. Like it was one of those. So like I was going to get into why that happened, just because choral music is such an incredible thing to experience in a room together with people like that and creating that. But I'm so glad she was okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so glad she was all right. And that,
yeah, I think she just needed some food. But also we found out later that she was pregnant, which she hadn't told anybody yet.
That's
so it may have had something to do with
Oh my gosh.
Unconfirmed. But as soon as she said that, all of us were like yeah. She was like, I don't know, baby. Anyway, that was a very memorable moment for me on a scoring stage.
Wow.
Nothing like that ever happened before.
So why is, like you said, that there's kind of, especially modern composers tend to use like the quieter, like effect choral or chorale. Why is using like more powerful choral like so, I guess emotional, or like why is it so powerful for us listening to these scores? Because I feel like, especially with Star Wars, which is like one level, all of the choral pieces end up just having that much more punch to them, and they're just like, they just end up resonating spiritually or like, you know, psychologically with people a lot more. But why is chorals just like, why I'm just I don't know, why does it work?
Well, oh gosh, there's a lot of layers to that question, I think. I think the fact that it's so human, you know, and everyone has, whether or not you think you're a good singer, right? Sort of immaterial. Everyone has the ability to sing, and everyone has this instrument that's part of their bodies, right? And it's so individual. So I think just on a sort of like almost molecular level, I think when we hear choirs in films, it just humanizes what's going on. It you know, if you don't have any experience playing an instrument yourself and knowing what goes into playing an instrument, I think there's only so close you can get sometimes to the music. But singing and speaking, and you know, everybody has experience with that. I think as far as like Star Wars goes and John Williams music in general, I think that he benefits, and therefore we benefit, from his knowledge and experience of music in the concert hall. There are a lot of composers who don't really have much experience with orchestras or, you know, going to performances of live orchestral music. And I think that he thinks about that when he writes, and also that informs the sound that he wants to hear, right? So composers who don't have a lot of experience with live musicians, and especially with live singers, their aesthetic tends to lean more towards what sample libraries can do really well, and also not necessarily sounding natural. You know, you end up having composers who write things that the samples do really well, you know, especially if they maybe don't always have the resources to record with live musicians. Right. And so I think that's one of the reasons that you get a lot of the same kinds of traits of music, or like the same kind of rhythms, right? There are sample libraries that do eighth notes or 16th notes really well, but anything that's like more legato or complicated or whatever, like maybe they don't do that well. So people tend not to write for that. So yeah, it's sort of a layered answer, but John Williams, you know, he's obviously spoken about his influences of classical music, and he's incredibly well educated in that style. And so I think his ear wants to hear music that you would hear on a stage. And that includes singers sounding like real singers instead of like a computer.
And
totally.
It's easy to forget, but his start, or one aspect of his early career, was as an arranger, and specifically as an arranger for Mahalia Jackson and her gospel choir. So
amazing.
From the very start, he was involved in writing for the human voice, and
what a voice!
Well,
what voice
to help her, right? And his oeuvre pretty much from the get-go with his first couple of scores. I mean, once you get into any of the larger soundtracks, he recruits choir with some regularity. It's not just in Star Wars, but like you mentioned, Home Alone, Empire of the Sun, and sometimes it's used more coloristically, and other times it's really pretty integral to the soundscape.
Yeah. And of course, as you sort of hinted to just then, it really depends what's happening on screen. I mean, that that sort of, more sample sound where it's like straight or kind of boy soprano or whatever, it obviously has a place in film. It has a very important place. There's a reason that people like it. It works with picture, for certain moments. But, like on Rise of Skywalker, we were in large part being the Sith, and
like the Sith chorus type. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's no place for like angelic singing with the Sith, right? They just wanted us to go full out, and it was really, really nice for us.
Incredible.
To let loose.
Are you asked to do a lot of like sort of vocal special effects, whispers and glissando?
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that. It depends on the project, but with Rise of Skywalker, J.J. Abrams actually came out and conducted us doing the Sith whispering. So the whisper is super fun. And I think genuinely he enjoyed it a lot. Like he'd never done anything like that before. So they fed us some text, to say, and he just, got up, put his hands up and would conduct us. And he was like, this is the coolest thing that's ever happened to me. Like he was really enjoying it. So the whispers in the film are us, and those are nice and prominent too. So every time I see that, I'm like, yeah, we did that.
It feels like this is like a really good introduction to choral and your experiences as a vocalist as well as a session singer. I guess pause here. We'll wrap this episode up. And then the next episode we have, which I'll release right after. So it's like part 1, part 2, really, really close together, will be all about deep diving into the choral of the prequels, which you're fairly new to because you're fairly new to Star Wars in general. But that's okay. Yes. Fresh ears, especially expert ears like yours, are appreciated. And we can talk about the different aspects of the choral in the prequels.
Yeah. And I want to tell you real quick, Elyse.
So this was amazing. Everybody make sure to come back in 2 weeks' time when our part 2 of this, where we dig into the choral of the prequels with Elyse joining the regular crew to offer her expertise. So I guess starting with Elyse, where can people find you if they're looking for you and your work online?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Elyse M. Willis and ElyseWillis.com.
And Frank?
I am on Twitter at FM Lehman, although right now I'm attempting to do a Twitter hiatus for my sanity. Okay, so far. And you can also find me on franklehman.com.
And Christy?
Same for me, Twitter, Christy_Carew and ChristyCarew.com.
And thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We would like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force: Brad, Cheryl Bell, Melody, Night Huntress, In Wild Space, Felicia, How Rude, Anna Perez, Macau Mom, Neil, James, Joe Allen D, Christian Luca, Josh Johnson, Scott C, and Susan. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or other pod apps. It helps people find the show. Check out our other channel on YouTube, What the Fiction, for all sorts of other types of fiction. You can connect with us on Twitter at WT Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, or our website, where we have expanded our content to include reviews, metas, and articles, whattheforce.ca, or on our new Discord. Links are in the liner notes. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.